Hello, and welcome back to the Things We Know. I'm Carrie Morin.
And I'm Lisa Callahan. And today I am so excited to be introducing both Carrie and all of y'all to one of my favorite people, which is Amy Pickard. You are in for a treat.
Yay! So excited.
Hi, so nice to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you here. So, like many of you listeners of a certain age, women of a certain age, if a man's listening, and quite frankly, you don't even need to be of a certain age, because the reality of it is Amy is a multifaceted, multi-passionate, beyond talented, hilarious human being that has created so many good things out to put out in the world. And so I'm going to tell you right off the bat, we're going to talk about something very near and dear to my heart and Amy's as well. But she is going to be back for another session that is going to be even funnier. But we're just going to tease that. We're not going to tell you what that's about.
I'm super excited for both.
Yeah, all of this is going to be good. Today, though, she's here for part 3 of our series around necessary losses. So Amy is the creator and CEO of Good to Go. And like all of us, Amy has lived through loss, and she decided to create this brilliant resource for others because she wanted to help alleviate some of the uncertainty that arrives in the aftermath of death. Basically, she's here to bring advanced planning into the mainstream conversation, and she really has made it so easy and gorgeous, quite frankly, and it's funny. And I can say all of this because I am, as well as my husband and my sister and my brother-in-law and several people that I know, a customer of Good to Go.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited for this because I heard about you way back when Lisa started sharing it, and I thought I have to know more. I can't get through any of your videos, and I've been fangirling you since I learned about it without laughing. And yet I learned so much, and it was so touching at the same time. So bravo. And can I add that you were named as one of the top 5 people changing the death business in LA?
I know, I was so excited and so honored.
I'm just happy to learn more today and have everyone learn more. And I'm already thrilled that you're coming back.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share, because that's the thing. When you learn something, you immediately want all your friends to know. So I'm like deathy Paul Revere on horseback saying, death is coming, death is coming. I want to go to every door and let everybody know.
Like a big bell, just like a big bell
exactly.
walking through the streets.
Love that.
Okay, so Amy and I go back a very long time. We have probably known each other since we were 15-ish, I would say. Yeah, so we met back in the band scene in Dayton, Ohio, back in the mid 80s. And then you moved. I mean, you've done a myriad of things. You worked for VH1 in London. You've lived out here in LA for 20 years, and that's really where we reconnected.
Right.
And it's so fascinating because you took my husband, Darren, to see Howard Jones. We hadn't been here very long. I'm going to say 6 or 8 months. And Darren, I don't know why I didn't go, but you took Darren. Well, whatever, it's fine.
Well, I knew him better than you.
That's true.
Honest.
I know, it's funny. I mean, we will not go deep into the backstory, but it is funny because Amy and I knew each other, but we were not really friends back in the 80s. So Amy definitely knew my husband better. And then, so you take Darren to Howard Jones, and the next day, Darren, we got up and we were talking, and he's like, oh my God, Amy has created this thing called Good to Go. And immediately I was like, I need to promote this. Like, I don't know how I can help more people, but I hadn't even really gotten into it yet, but I just knew instinctively. And this was before both my parents had died. So it wasn't tied to that at all. But it was just, I just thought it was so incredible. And then, I don't know, maybe a year into living here, you had one of your advanced planning parties. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, why don't you start from the beginning? What made you create Good to Go?
Yeah, I mean, I was living a happy freelance bohemian life in Los Angeles as a freelance television producer and broadcaster for the BBC, and working in television and film and all those things. And then my mom died in 2012, just out of the blue, unexpectedly. She was my best friend, my cheerleader, my everything. And I was completely overwhelmed by all of the death duties after someone dies. And I was not ready in the wilderness of grief, my first kind of major death that I'd ever experienced. So I don't know what the hell's happening. My brain is scrambled. And then suddenly I found myself having to instantly be a detective, a florist, a party planner, an accountant, a travel agent, a party planner with only 2 weeks to plan because you've got to hurry up and have the funeral or life celebration. And all of these things, all these questions came up. And, I went from living in LA and driving in the sunshine to the beach on the weekends to having the Chicago coroner on speed dial. And she was just like, do you know if your mom wanted to be cremated or buried? And I said, well, I know she wanted to be cremated, but I don't have any paperwork. I've got to go to Chicago, try to go through her stuff, figure out if she had something written down, something official. I mean, I knew we had a verbal agreement. She would joke and say, oh, just cremate me and put me in a mayonnaise jar and stick me out to trash day. But when she actually died, I looked in the fridge at a Miracle Whip container and I was like, I can't do that one. And so I had to tell the coroner, hey, can you put mom on ice just for like a couple more weeks? Because I don't know what the hell's going on and I've got to figure it out. And so flew to Chicago, went into her condo. I didn't even know the name of the electric company in Chicago because I needed to have the lights on, and it was just one thing on top of the other. I had a to-do list that was 5 pages long. I mean, it's a good thing that I have producing experience because I produced the shit out of my mom's death.
Oh.
But, for lesser mortals, I, at the same time, was the only person to do all these things. So I didn't have the luxury of overestimating my fortitude. You just have to, put your head down and keep doing it. And so that long rambling story short, it made me want to make the chaos count. And I just thought, I don't want anyone else to go through this. It's so painful. It's so hard, especially when you're grieving and your heart is broken and you've got to actually be upright and sociable and, all these things. And so I thought, I'm going to just write down all the questions I come across and I'm going to put it in a little booklet just for people to know, my friends, just my friends and their parents. And, it's stuff that you don't include in a will, and I made like a 50-page, booklet. I call it the departure file because Good to Go, I look at it as kind of a deathy travel agency. I'm trying to make the trip to death easier for you. So I offer you the departure file.
Well, really, the reality of it, it's not easier for the person dying in some ways, right? That's the thing I always think about is this is more about the people you leave behind.
Totally.
It makes it so much easier for them. So one of the things that strikes me right out of the gate is no one likes to talk about death, right? But how about you focus on the people you love and don't get so caught up in yourself and instead think about, I am doing this for my friends, my family, my kids, whatever it might be, instead of like, I don't want to talk about death.
True.
Well, if you don't want to talk about death, imagine how much your loved ones don't want to have to deal with your phobia around death, which is what they're going to have to do, if you don't leave any instructions. And I always tell people, I tell parents, you want to set your kids up for success. So why does that stop when you die? Because you're going to die and you're not setting them up for success if you don't have a will and a trust. Oh, by the way, I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. I'm just someone that has lived through grief. Okay. But I do recommend that people go to an estate attorney, get a will or a trust, get an advanced healthcare directive or living will, and then get the departure file. Because the departure file is everything that a will doesn't include, like electronic passwords. Like, I meet people that say, oh, I've got my advanced planning sorted. And I was like, really, are you estranged with anyone? And they're like, huh? And I said, well, that's a question in the departure file. If you're estranged from someone, because if you're suddenly in a coma and that estranged person calls your person and says, yeah, I want to come and say hi or goodbye, do you let them? Do you stop them? I don't know. And so it's little things like that that people don't think of. And if you're grieving and you've got it all written down and you're rock solid, the death duties then transmute into an honor, into
Mhm.
a do like a an I don't know, it's like a duty, but you're so proud of doing it because you're
Mm.
carrying out exactly what that person said.
Right. And I'm listening to that. I keep thinking in grief and unexpected or expected, people like to know their role. Like,
Mhm.
how do I do this? How do I walk through this? And you're giving everyone a role. And I can't help but think, listening to you, like, this is just the most beautiful, you know, way to use your struggle to become someone else's solution. Like, you went through something horrible, and what a generous thing you did with that grief to create this for people. It's incredible.
It kind of came about because as I was telling friends, talk to your elderly parents, get your poop in a group, you've got to do this, listen to me, I went through this. It's like I'm a little woo woo now, after living in California for 20 years. I mean, especially after everybody died in my family within a very short amount of time. I'm waiting for the mothership to come now. But I do feel that my story and my Dayton, Ohio roots, you know, uh, help people understand, oh, you went through this. Okay, well, I don't want
Mhm.
my kid to go through this, or I don't
Mhm.
Yeah.
want to put my loved ones through what you went through. And then I started thinking, oh my gosh, they're listening to me, Carrie.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is what I was about to say too, because when we book guests, we ask you, and thank you for taking the time. We ask you some questions about, what you want to talk about, because you're giving us this gift of your time. And I loved what you said so much. Do you mind if I read a little bit of
Feel
it?
free.
It's so good, because to what you were just saying, you're getting people's attention in the most lovely way, right? And so you said, I feel like I'm their ghost of Christmas future, and I'm trying to warn them of the hellscape in store for them if they don't complete their advanced planning at their age, while they are hopefully young and healthy. But regardless, since my business targets people who are young and healthy and also females, and they statistically do most of the planning in the hetero relationships. That's so key. They're the ones who end up kind of holding and just like the ones who catch everything. And you said, you're like you said before, I'm the Paul Revere galloping saying the Grim Reaper's coming. But this is my favorite part. I'm the general leading them into grief with the tools and skills I learned from the front lines. I'm a grief condom, basically.
I
I'm a
will,
grief
from now
condom.
on, I'm calling you grief condom every
Yes,
time we go out. This
I
is my
just want
friend,
to
the grief
protect
condom.
you.
Can we rename this episode Grief Condoms?
Yes, we can.
But it's true, I was just trying to think of, like, how do we get such a hard topic across? And I just thought, I'm going to use all of me, all of
Mhm.
my personality, all of my extroversion, all of my humor, all of my love for rock and roll. And I thought, well, I'll do it within a party context. I'll have an advanced planning party, a bit like Tupperware parties. People have called me the death Tupperware lady. And when everybody comes to the party, either someone hosts it at their place, or I sometimes have parties here like once a month in Los Angeles at my place. And they all bring a potluck dish to share based on a recipe of a loved one, because I feel close to my mom and my granny when I cook and bake their treats. Lisa knows I
I
always make
do.
mom's recipes for her.
Aw.
And then we have booze, because if you're going to talk about the hard stuff, you need the hard stuff. Cheers, by the way,
Cheers.
ladies.
Cheers.
Here's to death and to life.
Woohoo. Huzzah.
Huzzah.
And then we have a rock and roll death theme soundtrack on Spotify of like Another One Bites the Dust and Stairway to Heaven and Knocking on Heaven's Door and things like
Oh
that.
my God, I love it.
I just
It's
wanted
so
to
fun.
take all of my experience working in pop culture and bring this message of advanced planning through pop culture. So it's just a little, I used to joke that it's like a pill that you give your dog wrapped in cheese, and so it's like Good to Go is, the pill and the humor and the party is the cheese.
And the really annoying dogs eat around it, but
Exactly. Well, the smart ones do, but
Well, and
yeah.
I was at one, right? So I was at one. It was cool because and you can look all this stuff up. We'll try to link all of it, but you NPR wanted to do a piece on this. And so you invited several friends to come over and you ran one of these parties. And what I thought was really cool about it was that part of what this packet, first off, it's no longer 50 pages, because one of the cool things that you've done is because this has been going for a while, you said your mom died in 2012. So we're talking, maybe a little less than 10 years. As you learn new things, like even when my mom died, I remember calling you and saying they wouldn't let us run an estate sale because of HOA. And you were like, I've never heard of that. I'm adding it to the file. So as you start to have other friends have these situations, you are constantly adding to this, which is very cool. But you go through it kind of at a top level and walk people through not only why you've included some of these things with your own stories and so forth, but also why it's so important to do. And so it is a learning experience with booze and rock and roll, and quite frankly, a ton of laughter. And so it does lighten the load of now, because now it is about you, right? Because you're writing in this, you're writing all this stuff down. So you are confronting your inevitable death, because we're all going to die. And so, but with that levity,
spoiler alert.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, shoot. I would make sure we put it at the front of the pod. There's a spoiler alert. We're all going to die.
I thought I was immortal.
Oh my God. But the parties are amazing. And yes, you live here in LA, but you have traveled with it, with expenses paid. You have traveled to go do these parties other places.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I've had parties in Dayton, Ohio with my hometown. Yeah. And in LA, sometimes I've had them at Mexican restaurants, which is always interesting. We're out on the patio talking about, if you're unable to make decisions about your care and you're in a coma, can I have some, Tostitos over here? It's just kind of like, everyone was kind of like, what is happening? But the people involved, no one has ever left a good to go party sad, depressed, or morbid. They leave rejuvenated and, dare I say, jubilant, because they're alive now. And they don't have to deal with any of this scary stuff that we're talking about, emotional stuff, and so we don't have time in 3 hours to go through the entire departure file, but I do go through and let people know why it's in there, and why a certain question, do you have any subscriptions? When someone dies, the death duties are overwhelming, and that doesn't even include having to clean out a home of someone you've loved, or other things like that. It's just the logistics. So I always say, leave behind love, not logistics. It's hard.
I was just thinking, when you say they leave jubilant, I think it's true of any difficult conversation. You always feel so good after. Why do we put them off? Like, people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about money. And then they talk about money and they're like, oh, I feel so much better. Doesn't mean they suddenly have a bunch of money. They just lifted the stress around it, right? Same thing. Like, I don't want to talk about death. And then once you do, it's like, oh, there's nothing to fear now.
Yeah. And also, I think that fear is so overwhelming and so kind of crippling to people. And what they don't understand is yes, you have to talk about your own mortality and what you would like in death, but really the departure file is all about life and living. And that's what advanced planning is. It's all about your life. It's all about how you want that life expressed until you are no longer. And you even have a chance to write down how you'd like to be remembered, how you'd like to be memorialized. There's the first half of the departure file is all kind of bills and online passwords and, things like that, your Wi-Fi password. When I ended up at my mom's, I was going to have to stay there for a week and, go through her papers and clean everything and sell everything and all those, death duties. And I was just laying there on the carpet where she had dropped dead. And I was just like, Mom, I just want to talk to you one more time. And it's not for me to hear you tell me that you love me. It's to get your fucking Wi-Fi password, because it's making things difficult. I can't even research crematoriums right now. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, put all hands on the table. What is the Wi-Fi password? It was just awful.
Before Carrie, you have a great question, but I want to, because we're talking about what's in the file, I always love to presence my favorite part of it, which is there is a place for you to write down your memories from every decade of your life. And I just when I did that, now, unfortunately, I did make the mistake of doing it right after my mom had passed. So there was a lot of tears, but I just remember thinking like, my kids are going to get to come in and read what I felt like in my teens, in my 20s, in my 30s, you know, pre them essentially. And I just think that is one of the most gorgeous pieces of the departure file. So that's the point. Yeah, there's all the specifics, all the admin things that you aren't thinking about, but then there's all of this gloriousness that is truly the actual gift that you're giving your family after the fact.
I love that. I love that. We gave my mother-in-law this prompt of, and she's just really into it, like asking random questions about growing up, and she's into it. And my mom kind of dropped off, and I think she'd like that better. Just how to encapsulate her decades would be so much of a better fit for her. And she'd probably be able to, you know, gather some photos for it too. So I love that. So I love,
oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, as they're filling it out, maybe your mom doesn't want to actually write it down. So you can just take a voice note on your phone and ask her. You know, I tell people, like, if you feel that you're not going to have the attention to sit down, because it does take about 5 hours to complete, you know, because I completed it. But it's one of those things where it just makes you feel so good to know that you have it. And so the departure file is a history of your bills and you know, logistics, and then the other half, for me, the hippie half that helps you in grief, is a history of your joy.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so it is, you know, I found myself after my mom died connecting to her favorite things. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps. And so if she would have written down, I mean, Good to Go wasn't invented when my mom died, but if she would have written down places, my favorite places to travel, and if she had written, you know, a cafe in Paris that she loved going to and always ordered a cappuccino, you can bet if I ever go to Paris, I'm going to go to that cafe and have a cappuccino and think
now
of
I have
her.
chills. Now I have chills.
And
I
so,
love this. Okay. I'm having a major light bulb about a retreat, ladies. So we'll have to talk about that, because that sounds like, you say 5 hours. That sounds like a really good, productive morning to be, you know, capped off with some partying later.
yeah.
I'm down.
I like that idea. Okay, so I love what you're describing about the departure file. I want to know even more, but what I want to go back to, and maybe you covered it, but if for me and the listeners, what's a sonic will?
Oh, okay. This is one of my favorites just because I love music. And I didn't discover this term until after all my people died. But a sonic will is basically, what sound or sounds would you like to be surrounded by on your deathbed? You know, and there was a Japanese artist, I think her name was Yoko Sen, and she was in the hospital for some sort of illness, and she's a musician, an ambient musician, and she realized that all the sounds were very aggressive, beeps, and scary. You know, you're sitting there and you're ill and you're hearing beeping and your heart beating on the monitor. What if it flatlines? You know, like what? And so she's trying to actually make those sounds much more gentle, as well as inviting, you know, people to offer up their own version of what would comfort them. Now, if I'd have known this while my dad was in the ICU for 6 days, I would have, and I walked in there and the nurses had turned on The Price is Right, which is so obnoxious.
Oh, all those bells.
Yes, if you're in a different room and The Price is Right is on the other room, you're going to take a hostage. It's insane. And I just thought, this isn't comforting for my dad. But had I known about a sonic will, my dad loved to fish, I would have played some soundtrack to a lake where there's loons in the background and the waves of, you know, are lapping against the boat, and you can hear the gentle whir of a cast and, you know, clicking as you're reeling it in. You know, he would have loved that. And again, when you write this stuff down, it gives the other person who's grieving you or going through this process a purpose.
Yeah.
If you feel helpless, you are actually giving them something helpful to do, so you don't feel as helpless.
Mm.
And we referenced this. I referenced this in last week's episode with Beth about when I knew this as well. My dad didn't get to write out his good to go either, but because we had these, I had done it. Amy and I had had so many conversations that I did do some of the asking versus actually writing it down. And also just some general knowing, like I wouldn't have thought that either had you not told me this story. So when my dad when I walked into his hospice room and they had Entertainment Tonight on, I was like, yeah, nah, that's not. And you know, I know why they were doing it. Like I wasn't like, what are they doing? But I'm like,
Sure.
you know, they want sound, they want
Yeah.
ambience, right?
Yeah.
But I turned it off and I turned music on. And the reality of it was he couldn't hear it, but I could. And it was also helpful for me to sit in a space where I'm listening to 70s music, Steely Dan, Eagles, that type of thing. And just felt like this is what dad would want to be surrounded by. So I was so grateful that you had told me that story beforehand.
I don't know if you both followed the story of Nick Cordero, the Broadway star who ended up passing away from COVID complications. But I read his wife's memoir about that whole experience because they were in Cedars-Sinai where my dad had been. And so some of it felt so similar. And also at the same, when I was reading it, I was in the ICU with my son. So something was really compelling about it. But she talks about that, like you were saying, he couldn't hear it. And she was so certain, not only could he hear it, but that, again, this goes to the woo, the actual songs that came on in those final moments were just eerily exactly right. And I think that's what's so cool about what you're both sharing to me is just the zeitgeist that happens in that moment around, you know, what this person wants and your attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
I mean, I said it last week, but I woke up and dad was gone and Reeling to the Ears was playing. And I was like, thank you, Steely Dan.
Yes. It's so perfect.
Yeah.
You know? But it's such a hard thing. It's a hard sell. But what I try to tell people is, you know, because grieving is just so difficult. It's when we have to bear the unbearable, you know? And so if you've got instructions, and you don't have to use that mental space that your brain does not have. And, you know, not only is it good to go into an emergency situation, having already discussed hypotheticals and what one would want, whether it's writing it down in a departure file or recording it, or just making sure you tell everybody at the cookout, you know, what's going down. But it makes your grief so much easier. And if there was a pill to take when you're grieving to make you feel better and to, you know, conserve brain space and energy when you don't have it, and to, you know, help you, and to also remind you that you were so loved, that you were planned for, you know, all these things are going to be planned and you have to carry them out. It just makes it easier. It doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't, if you complete your advanced planning, it doesn't mean you're super chill with dying. It doesn't mean you want to die. It doesn't mean, I always say that planning isn't prophecy, because a lot of people are superstitious. Like, well, if I write down my advanced planning about when I'm going to die, that means I'm going to die. And it's like, back to the condoms. When you talk about condoms, do you get pregnant? When you get car insurance and you look around to shop around for the best deal, once you hit, pay, does suddenly you get in a car accident? No. You know, and so again, like, it's like when you have surgery and you're so worried, and then you wake up from surgery and you're like, when do we start surgery? And they're like, it's done. And you're just like, what? Why did I worry so much? That's the thing. It's like, once you write your shit down and your people know it, it's second nature. You're at the 4th of July cookout and you're watching the fireworks and you're like, oh, hey, Uncle Danny, you remember you wanted to be a firework, right? Well, I don't. I want to be turned into, you know, a coral reef because I'm really into the ocean or whatever, you know? And then when an emergency hits, your mind is just like, goes directly back to those conversations. And
love it.
That is where you're going to find the nourishment when you're grieving. And boy, do you need it, because I mean, and also, I mean, let's do a whole podcast on grieving when you're single. I just wanted a hug, you know, and I couldn't ask my best friends, could I have a platonic 10-minute long hug from your husband? Could that be cool? We could just put a pillow between us. And I mean,
you totally could have asked me. but
Oh, I wish, but if I ever write a book, which I really want to, because I have so much to, explode out talking to everybody, I'm going to call it Grief Hooker, because I wanted to buy a grief hooker. I wanted to just pay Keanu Reeves just like $300 to just come over to my place and hold me and tell me it's going to be okay.
Oh,
I mean, I think we've already sort of hit on this, and the answer is obvious. It's like, why are so many adults unwilling to complete their advanced planning? Because you just said it, right? They think it's prophecy. Nobody likes to think about death. And so I think the question is, what are some of the things? I mean, I've already said, like, focus on, really, this isn't for you. This is for the people you leave behind. But is there anything else you say to people to help them step into this?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, use me. I will be the bad cop. And during parties, and when I've done families, those are the most fun parties, because everyone learns stuff about each other that they never knew. And they're like, wait a minute, I don't want your collection of county fair Jack Daniels mirrors.
ceramic turtles.
Yeah. I don't want your precious moment figurine. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna sell those off eBay. And no, but I tell people, use me, the crazy girl with the curly hair on Facebook Live, or Grievers and Groovers told me to do this, or I saw this, I listened to this podcast and this crazy woman was going on and on about it, and if that doesn't work, I say, approach your elderly parents or your current spouse and say, I'm getting my stuff together. I'm getting my poop in a group. And I realized nobody that I love knows what I want. You don't know what I want. And so now I just realized I don't know what you want. So let's figure this out, because you don't want to try to have the conversation in the middle of an emergency.
Right.
I cannot imagine my dad, who is on his deathbed in the ICU, and because everything was taken care of, I said, everything's taken care of. He was intubated, so he can only kind of communicate with his eyes. But the look of peace on his face, it makes me emotional just thinking about it. He was just like, yeah, it's all sorted and I don't have to worry about it. And so I was able to use that space and that opportunity to say that the privilege of a lifetime has been being your daughter. Instead of, what's the code to the garage?
Yeah.
Tap it out on my hand. Blink once for yes if the spare keys are in the place you told. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want that.
I do want to tell a funny story that might be completely inappropriate, but I'm going to do it anyways. Do you remember? I think you know where I'm going with this. So the one thing we didn't know was my mom's 4-digit code to get into her phone. And do you know what I'm going with this?
No.
And I was texting you and you were like, I know this might sound really bad, but is there like a way that you could open the phone over her casket? Like
Do a little face ID.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that, but thank you.
I mean, the gallows humor is the best.
It really is.
I'm laughing because of so many stories you hear about that. Like, sometimes that's all people can do to get through it, is be like, I love you, and damn it, I wish you hadn't left that Tupperware in the back of my fridge.
Yes.
It's just these hilarious dualities happening at the same time. But it's so beautiful. It right now, two things are hitting me. Like, if I love my kids, and I do, I don't want them to have to figure that out.
Yeah.
And then also, there's the most thoughtful thing, and also just talking about it really puts you into that mindset of, time is so precious. How do I want to live? Like, how do I want to spend my time, and how do you want to spend your time, and why should we put off the things that are only going to stress us out? Why don't we just deal with them now? I just love this.
Right. And then there's even a thing in there that says, words of comfort I would give you while you're grieving me. And also another question, these are the following things that comforted me when I had to grieve people close to me. And then I have a space where you can write down any kind of art or films or music. Music got me through. Music is my boyfriend. It got me through the death of my entire family
Mm.
in a very short amount of time. And so I can appreciate the fact that people don't want to face this or talk about it. But even a random 30-second hypothetical, for example, a conversation. For example, before my dad died, a year before he died, we were just hanging out in the living room. And I said, hey, by the way, if you had a stroke or something, like, what would you want me to do? Because I live in LA, and you live in Dayton, Ohio. So what do you see happening? And he was like, well, I guess you just have to put me into some kind of rehab home and then visit me when you could. And I just thought, fee you, because if we wouldn't have had that conversation, I would have felt guilty. I would have thought, I have to take care of him. I've got to move out of Los Angeles, move back to Ohio, take care of my dad, So just a random 30-second conversation eliminated a lifetime of questioning, guilt, change, abruptness. I mean, just everything. And so just a hypothetical conversation of, okay, I've got a departure file, I've got to fill it all out, but I don't really care about any furniture or whatever, just a little guideline, any kind of instruction, and that's why the departure file has so many annoying details.
They're glorious details.
They're glorious because it all comes down to love. This whole thing is so driven by love. It's so beautiful.
I mean, if I could just relieve a grieving person from just an ounce of weight that they're experiencing, I mean, that's the whole
Which, to be fair, you totally did for me.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
I know. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make you cry, but you did. And again, neither one of my parents had the opportunity to do it. My mom had very much set herself, with the exception of her phone, clearly, she had set up a lot. Like, she had done so much work. But in the moment, because my mom's was unexpected, you were one of the first people I called, and just, you were just there as like a person for me, like a resource, and I had these conversations with them. Again, nothing written, but the conversations meant something, and we're able to, my sister Amy and I were able to make decisions based on this,
And it was an
Yeah.
instant, okay, I remember we talked about it. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yep.
you don't have to be a detective. You don't have to go through a million folders and figure it's just like, nope, the departure file is here with my, with my papers,
Yep.
and I'm single. I have a note on my fridge, dear hot EMTs,
He does.
here is my departure file. This is where it is. Get my phone. This is my code.
Does it say fill me up first or something?
It definitely says, I think my vagina might need tending to. I don't know what's happening. No.
That's the next time. Again, next spot. No,
That's
I was
right.
sitting at the dining room table a couple weeks ago eating, and I looked over and I was like, what is, it's her, good to go.
My God, that's
your hot EMTs. I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, I know what it is.
Yeah, she was sitting at my table, and because people think, oh, you don't really have a sign. No, I have a sign.
She really has a sign.
And, and I went around, empty wall space is my enemy because I'm a maximalist. And so I put Post-it notes on the back of all my artwork saying where I got it and who I would like to give it to, but with the caveat saying, but if you don't want it, that's okay too. And this is what I tell people. It's like, okay, so you want to have your ashes spread wherever, can you just put down, there's no time limit. And then also the question in the departure file is, are you in possession of someone else's cremains? Because if you die and you have grandma's ashes under the bed, your loved ones are going to be like, oh shit, what do we do with grandma?
Which again, that was a question I asked my mom, because my mom had my stepdads. And so I said, Amy, and I said to her, my sister, Amy, what do you want to do with Lowell's ashes? And she said, see if you can put them together, which we did.
And it's just like little hypotheticals like that. Yep. And I had a couple, I got them good to go. And then they said they wanted to be traditionally buried. And I said, well, talk to your grown kids, about your plans and all of that. And they did. And their two daughters said, actually, we don't want you to be traditionally buried. We'd prefer you to be cremated so we could have a little bit of you, each of us, and then also sprinkle you somewhere nice, not a cemetery. And so they changed their plans. And so
Mm.
this is the thing. You've got to talk to the people you love the most and ask them, maybe they want something a little more somber than being shot out of a rocket for a firework. Maybe they just want something a little more low key, And so it's all about communication,
Mm.
and I graduated from college in mass comm degree, and it's just like communication, communication.
That's what I've been thinking of this whole time. Loving communication. This is
Mhm.
going to I'm just amazed. I think you would be proud. I know Lisa was mentioning her parents, and we were going to get to this next. I think you'd be impressed with my dad in that we didn't know when he had a lung transplant that did buy us like 3 extra years, but those 3 years were not high quality living. He wasn't himself. He came out with good lungs, but kidney failure and heart failure.
Mm.
So I think before he even got that transplant, knowing what was coming, he had been a fighter pilot. He was a Marine, like and he had a file that said notes on the passing scene.
Dude.
I know.
The passing scene.
I know.
Again, originally from
SCENE.
SoCal.
Yeah. Well, actually, he's from Rochester, New York. So, but it's SCENE. I think it's from his acting days, like the end scene, the passing scene. But it was such a gift because we had been talking about some things. He wasn't always there. In fact, I was laughing listening to you because when someone's not lucid and they aren't eating, you do have to start talking about hospice and things. And then he would be completely sharp going, you guys were talking about hospice? Like, well, you were asking for keys to your plane and you were like, I don't know. So I think he got a little bit like, dude. So when he was lucid, he was like making sure we knew some things, but he was just so organized and loving and thoughtful and like always thought ahead. So there were so many things that we knew just to do, like that got carried out. And listening to you and thinking about that, I realized the business of grief is in itself so important. And to add tasks to it takes away the grieving. And then you this arbitrary amount of time goes by and you're getting all these things done and you're like, I guess I should be over it. And you didn't do the most important thing, which is just be with your grief. And I think that's what you're offering here. And it's such a gift because I think about that. Like we knew that because he's Catholic and wanted to have a mass, that he wanted to have the coffin with the flag at the funeral, but then be cremated.
Right.
And then have a military ceremony out at a national cemetery. And like, we knew all that. We were able to carry all it out. The only thing he didn't tell us was what he wanted on the darn tombstone. And for some reason, that very like short amount of words took me forever. Like that, we all divvied up a few different things. And I was like, how about this? How about this? So
too legit to quit. No.
Yeah.
Okay. No.
Exactly. So, but I think about that all the time. And he died the way he lived. Like, he like fought till the very end to not leave her, but like didn't want anything heroic done. And he left exact instructions and there was no guessing. He did not ever want an open casket. And my mom thought he looked so peaceful that she decided to go against that wish. And our takeaway was like, you really don't have any say at that point.
No.
And it was comforting for her. But in general, it was just such a beautiful, beautiful way to remember him and be so loved by him when he was gone. So I really appreciate that.
And you felt that through the death duties. And if you're not prepared for the death duties, like you said, it can certainly hijack your grief. I mean, I definitely felt hijacked. My grief was hijacked because my mom did not have anything written down. And then we did find an old will a week later from the 90s. Then I had to track down her ex-boyfriend who was in the will. I mean, it was just a nightmare, And so it's just, I don't want these preventable, 100% preventable situations happening so that, they would hijack your grief. I say that, we spend more time building a burrito than we do, talking about what we want done when we die or how we'd like to be remembered, I mean, do you want like a rose bush planted and then every summer when it blooms, your kids will think of you, or you want a tree, or, who knows? There's just a million different things. But if you make clear what your wishes are, it just lifts that burden of knowing. And then another thing that really gets me is that I wanted to kind of transmute that energy around in that chaos of illness or whatever, to from uncertainty to certainty, from spending the rest of your life wondering if that's was okay what you decided for them, or is that what they would have wanted, or but if you've got instructions, it, so you're not going to have that hole in your heart wondering if they knew and if it was okay and what did they think, and all of those things. And so it's just trying to, I kind of hate the word closure because you never really get closure with grief, but as much closure as you can get, it's by instruction. I mean, I'm sure if you call the pizza guy, all of your family's favorite toppings, right? So what this one kid doesn't like and what the other kid likes. They might have different opinions on what they want to do if something happened to them and they died. And that's another thing too that's really scary for parents. If you've got a teenager, they're old enough to make those decisions if they want to have a life celebration or a funeral or songs that they want played or who they want to come and, things like that. Or what are their thoughts? What do you think happens when we die? Just that conversation alone, my mom was very kind of woo-woo and new agey, and she shared with me, and that was so comforting, So
God, I love this.
Vacation.
Before we get to the songs, I know that Lisa talked to you about a song. I was thinking about, there's just so many cool things about you. We could do like a whole series on you. You've done some really neat things. And what I love about how you're doing this through pop culture, through like the experience and the connections and the production stuff you've already done. Can you tell us a little bit about like the British consulate asking you to come talk about advanced planning? This is so cool. I want to hear more. And I don't think about the British sitting around talking about dying either. So
I know it's so crazy, but the British consulate asked me, they've got a international sync conference every year where songwriters and producers and composers come from all over the world to Los Angeles as guests of the British consulate. And then they have these workshops at Capitol Records studios and at different venues all over the city. And I was asked to give a speech about the importance of advanced planning for musicians and composers. And, obviously they've got musical instruments. And so, 9 times out of 10, the spouse isn't musical. So let's pretend you're married to a musician and they die suddenly. What do you do with this guitar? And like, oh, I guess I'll sell it. And then the person's like, no, not the Gretsch guitar. Don't sell that, and it's like, you got to write it down, and so I got to go to Capitol Records studio where Frank Sinatra and my personal musical boo, spirit animal, Paul McCartney, recorded. So I'm in the room where the Beach Boys recorded all their hits, and where Paul McCartney and Nat King Cole, and and I'm talking about death. I'm talking about my little business, Good to Go, and why everybody needs to be good to go. It's like I remember telling them, if you go on tour, that might be the last time you see your person. Things happen on tour, or whatever, and so for me, it was like the perfect synergy of rock and roll and death, my two big passions in life.
And then you created an addendum for musicians. So like we have the addendum to this so that Darren can write down where all of his equipment goes, which I just thought also was just brilliant,
God, we will need that for all these guitars. Yeah.
I can already see Carrie. I could see the wheels turning, and Carrie said, she's like, okay, I need this one and I need this one.
Right.
I'll tell you, like the other place that wheels are turning when you said words to comfort you when I'm gone, I was also thinking like these comforting words and get a haircut or
right. Or would it kill you to put some lipstick on? That's probably what my granny would have said.
Be sure you shave before the ceremony. I don't know. Something
during a Good to Go party, my dad, when I said that, I said, what words would you like to be spoken when you're on your deathbed? And Dad raised his hand and I said, yeah. And he goes, how about you're not fucking dying? And I was like, well, okay, yeah, thanks for playing. That is one. But let's just say that you are dying. And what would you like to be said?
How about you're so pretty.
Yeah.
People liked you.
People liked you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, you were the best daughter ever. Thank you. No,
Mhm.
it was like one of the last sentences he said to me. It was like, I have to poop, and I'm just like, oh my God, you guys, he's got to poop. And they're like, that's good. His body's working. Tell him to let it go, So it's just like, what? So it's just a surreal situation
Yeah.
Oh my
when
God.
you're into something like that. But I would also just like to say one more thing as far as funerals or life celebrations go. I say hire a photographer. And that might sound a little weird to people, but it's a gathering of loved ones that might not possibly happen again. With
Mhm.
every relative of mine, loved one that had died, I wish I would have taken a picture, or wish I would have had a professional photographer taking photos of my mom's life celebration, because all of these people loved her and I want to see who loved her and who was there. And my granny was there, and then when my granny died a year later, I didn't have any pictures of her at my mom's thing. And but people were like, no, don't take pictures at a funeral. So I just want to tell everybody, it's whatever you want. There are no rules. And so my dad said, I don't want a funeral. I don't want anything. And I said, well, that's for you. I said, but for me, I want to just get together with some of my friends and celebrate you and talk about funny stories and laugh and have some beer and pizza. And he was like, well, that's okay. And I'm like, okay. And so my dad was an animal lover, and I called my friend who has an animal sanctuary. And I said, will you bring baby animals to my dad's life celebration? Because this is the saddest fucking day of my life. And with baby animals, you can't go wrong.
That's such a brilliant idea. Oh,
And
what a
he brought
gorgeous thing.
them,
And did
he
you have photos taken too?
Yes, I did. I did hire a professional photographer for my dad's life celebration. And those are so precious to me because nobody was sad. Every picture, people were smiling and laughing. I got to snuggle with a 14-day-old fawn that had little freckles and speckles on it. I got to kiss
Oh,
little baby raccoons nom noms on their bellies, and it just made me feel better. Baby animals are the way forward, and the guy who runs the animal sanctuary, Daniel, he was just like, I've never used baby animals at a wake or a funeral, and maybe this is a new service I have to offer, because
oh, that's
everybody
brilliant.
was super into it, and my dad would have loved it.
The thing about the photographer that strikes me is so many people do not remember anything about it, about the celebration of their parent or their loved one, and it is such a gift to be able to go back and relive it that way because it's a blur, right? Especially if you're busy with all the details. But even when you're not, grief has its way of just protecting you. And suddenly you're like, who was there? I don't even remember. What did I
And
even
also,
say?
yeah, and I know that
Ah.
this sounds weird, but I'll try to, well, I'll just say it, but with photographs, you get proof that you're being comforted,
Mm.
because you just feel like you're not, there's nothing that could comfort you in your grief, But then if you see, well, for me, when I would see physical proof of people hugging me and, being loved and supported, that overtook that, narrative of, oh,
Yeah, this totally just made me cry because you're right. Just the pictures in my mind just brought me that. It's just so beautiful.
I mean, my dad, I threw a 70th surprise birthday party for him, and I hired a professional photographer, and there's pictures of us where we're just I'm just sitting there and I've got my head on his shoulder, we're just listening to friends talking and laughing, and just those pictures are priceless,
Mm.
priceless.
Wow, Amy,
I
this
mean,
is such a gift.
I mean, again, we could go on. I mean, you and I've interviewed you a couple of different times for my old sort of thing, pre the pod, and I could talk to you forever and ever and ever about all this because it is important. And again, this isn't, you get to hear Amy talking about it, but I'm here to tell you, I got to utilize, I was gifted to know of all this stuff ahead of time. And so I got to use it through the death of my dad and the unexpected death of my mom. And then Amy and I had another friend pass, and I got to use those same things there. And it was just such a gift to know that it was okay to take pictures, that it was okay to sit on the bed. Like there's all these things that are in there, and we haven't even scratched the surface of what is in the good to go departure file. And so I'm so honored and grateful that you said yes. This has been hilarious. So just wait till the next time we have her back. I mean,
I can't wait. I need that. I need that.
That's going to get even better.
Yes.
I'm so fun at parties though. When everyone's like, what do you do? And it's just like, are you ready?
I'm a grief condom. I'm a grief condom.
I'm going to stop you there because you and I have been out several times lately. And when somebody asks you what you do, you always say it. And I have seen time and time again, and maybe you don't recognize this, but I have watched it happen time and time again. And we've been at some fun things with some famous people. And when you say what you do, people always lean in. Now, granted, you've been talking mostly to women, but it's been fascinating to watch. Nobody goes, oh, okay, and then slowly walks away. Like they're right. No, they're fascinated. And you have such a gorgeous and funny and down home, again, Dayton, Ohio sort of way of talking about it, that people don't step away. And so that's why, to me, it is so important to hear your voice around this, because it is, I mean, it lightens the load for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like it's my cosmic calling. And that's another
No
thing
question.
that, because I listen to your podcast and I love the advice that you give and the things that you talk about. And you can have several callings. I was confused after my mom died about wanting to do this because it's not my passion. My passion is entertainment and television and producing and broadcasting and interviewing. And, and I was just like, well, wait a minute, where's the law that says you have to stick with one calling forever, And so it's not one thing or the other. It's just, I think especially now in the gig economy, it's, master or, Jill of all trades, master of none.
No, that's not true either.
I know, but I'm master of a lot of them. Yeah.
You are a master of a lot of them, which is what's so brilliant. All right. So you know this, everybody knows this. We love to share songs and lyrics. We've already talked about the fact that Amy has a rock and roll death playlist, which is phenomenal. And so is that on Spotify? Could people go look that up?
Yeah, and it's called the Good to Go Death Playlist.
Beautiful. Awesome.
Excellent.
But we wanted you to pick one. You had a couple. And I'm going to say I love that you picked the Flaming Lips because this is my son's favorite band. He has a tattoo of the Flaming Lips logo on his leg. And so I'm super into this. Would you like to read the lyrics from Do You Realize? Okay,
sure.
Go ahead.
I mean, I was tempted to get Snoop Dogg and Willie Nelson's Roll Me Up and Smoke Me When I Die.
I would have been okay with that.
I'm not going to use that one. So mine is Do You Realize? Do you realize that you have the most beautiful face? Do you realize we're all floating in space? Do you realize that happiness makes you cry? Do you realize that everyone you know someday will die? But instead of saying all of your goodbyes, let them know you realize that life goes fast and it's hard to make good things last. And you realize the sun doesn't go down, it's just an illusion by the world spinning round. Do you realize?
I love the lips. What a good choice.
This is a favorite in my house too. That was awesome. Amy, thank you so much. This is such an important topic. I'm so beyond touched. I don't know. I didn't know if I could, gather myself when I started to cry there. But I've laughed more than I've cried today, that's for sure. I'm especially grateful to you for empowering me to bring this to my siblings and my peers and my children so that we can all relax more and just have more fun, right? And just about the most inevitable thing there is, so that we can get to the living, and the loving. So I really appreciate you.
Oh my gosh.
Because Amy, what's the number one reason people die?
I think it's called birth, being born. We live in a.
We got a shit, Amy and I.
Yeah, it's just like, we prepare for earthquakes that might happen, but death is gonna happen, and we're like, nope.
Oh my God, so good.
Yeah. Well, I strongly suggest that you look at Amy's website, www.goodtogo peace.org. Of course, all these links will be in the show notes, so please pop up there and take a look. Honest to God, this is an investment that you will not regret. And it is about not just buying the good to go departure file, but also filling it out for
Completing
sure.
it.
Yeah, and that just because it sits in on your dining room table doesn't mean that your kids are gonna
Yes.
benefit
Those
from
are
it.
two different actions.
Right.
Buying
There's
it,
two action steps in
doing
this
it.
pod. Yeah.
And then they ask me, well, what do you have to say to people that just leave it sitting in their desk? And just like, I hate you. That's what I have to say. Like, you're going against what I'm advising. So bad person, bad.
You're like, oh, great. They had a bunch of things they intended. Shoot.
Wow, it would have been great if mom would have filled this out, but no, okay, now the cousins are fighting, and it's just, it prevents a lot of bullshit from happening,
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much. You're not going to read your lyrics?
No, those are, you get to read them. They're your lyric. The guest got carte blanche. So
That's yours. It's all you.
Yep, it's all you.
Okay, I thought you guys were going to pick a song too. So
Nope,
okay.
it's we do it every other week. So you get
right.
you get the full focus on you.
Well, I hope everybody realizes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song. It is one of my favorite Flaming Lip songs for sure.
All right, well, I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I hate that it's come to an end for now. We'll see you again soon. And that is it for this week's episode. Yeah. And if you're enjoying listening to the things we know, we are thrilled and glad you are here. So please consider following the Things We Know pod by clicking the plus sign or the follow button wherever you listen to podcasts.
And if you liked today's episode, please forward it to someone else you think will enjoy it or could use it. Everyone you know, ... But forward it with a laughing emoji, because they're going to be like, what, death? What? Laughing? How is this funny?
Skull and crossbones, laughter emoji.
Right. Heart.
Here we go. Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. So thanks everyone, as always, for listening to the Things We Know, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.